My name is Daniel Harper. I am 68 years old. I am a widower. Until that Christmas, I believed I had a good relationship with my only child. Looking back, I realize I confused peace with love. They aren't always the same thing. For almost 40 years, I owned a heating and air conditioning company outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well. My crews installed furnaces in freezing winters, repaired air conditioners during 90-degree summers, and answered emergency calls on holidays while everyone else was home opening presents. I was proud of that business, even prouder that I sold it honestly when I retired. After taxes and investments, I had more than enough to live comfortably without ever becoming one of those wealthy men obsessed with money. Money had always been a tool, never the goal. My wife Susan believed the same thing. She passed away 8 years before the story begins. Cancer, the kind that gives you hope just long enough to break your heart. Before she died, she squeezed my hand and whispered something I've never forgotten. Take care of Michael, but don't let loving him become protecting him from life. At the time I promised her I would. I meant every word. Unfortunately, keeping promises and understanding them are two very different things. Michael was 38 at Christmas. He worked in commercial real estate. His wife Emily taught part-time at a private preschool. They weren't poor, far from it. They lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom home 20 minutes from mine. 2 new SUVs sat in the driveway. They took vacations every summer. Their 2 children attended private school. From the outside, they looked like the picture-perfect American family. What almost nobody knew was how many times I'd quietly stepped in over the years. When Michael graduated from Ohio State with student loans, I paid them off. When he wanted to buy his first house, I covered the down payment. When Emily wanted to stay home after their first child was born, I quietly sent them money every month for nearly a year. When Michael's first business partnership failed, I wrote a check that kept him from declaring bankruptcy. I never asked for repayment. Not once. Every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary, I tried to make their lives easier. Maybe too easy. A year before Christmas, Michael called with what sounded like a reasonable request. Dad, would you mind adding me as an authorized user on one of your credit cards? Strictly for emergencies. What if something happens while we're traveling with the kids? It seemed practical. He wasn't asking for cash. He wasn't asking to borrow money. He simply wanted the ability to handle an emergency if I couldn't be reached. I agreed without hesitation. After all, he was my son. The card had a generous limit. I barely used it except for travel and occasional large purchases. I trusted him completely. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Snow covered the lawns throughout their neighborhood. Children were already outside building snowmen while parents carried coffee mugs from garage to garage, wishing one another Merry Christmas. I arrived around 9 o'clock carrying homemade cinnamon rolls, Susan's recipe, and wrapped presents for everyone. Emily hugged me. The grandchildren tackled my legs before I could even take off my coat. For a while, everything felt normal. The kids opened bicycles, video games, books, board games. I enjoyed every minute of watching them laugh. Then Emily's parents arrived. The mood changed. Michael suddenly became almost performative. He insisted everyone gather around while his father-in-law opened an expensive Rolex. His mother-in-law received a designer handbag she'd admired months earlier. There was a luxury weekend spa package, a 70-inch television, kitchen appliances, gift after gift. Emily cried. Her parents kept saying, "You two shouldn't have." Michael smiled proudly. "You deserve it." I remember sitting quietly in my chair, smiling because they seemed genuinely happy. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't counting presents. But after nearly an hour, the tree was empty. Everyone had opened something. Even the grandchildren's stockings were overflowing. I looked around. Nothing remained. I honestly thought maybe mine had been left in another room, so I asked softly, "Should I wait until later?" Michael frowned. "For what?" I smiled. "My gift." He blinked once, then shrugged. "Oh, I forgot to get you anything." Emily gave a nervous laugh. "We've just been so busy," said another word. Even the grandchildren looked confused. I felt something inside me grow strangely quiet, not angry, not embarrassed, just finished. I stood up, put on my coat, zipped my jacket, picked up the empty tray that had held Susan's cinnamon rolls. "Merry Christmas, everybody." Michael didn't even stand. Emily simply said, "Drive safe." That was it. Outside, the cold air hit my face harder than I expected. I sat in my truck for several minutes before starting the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. At the first red light, I glanced down. 3 credit card notifications had arrived. I almost ignored them. Instead, I opened the app. My stomach tightened. The purchases had posted overnight. A luxury jewelry store, an upscale department store, a designer boutique. Total charges just over $8,700. Every purchase matched the gifts I'd watched Emily's parents unwrap, paid for with my credit card. I stared through the windshield as snow drifted across the road. Then I laughed, not because anything was funny, because for the first time in my life the truth was impossible to avoid. They hadn't forgotten me. They had remembered me just enough to use my money. The next morning I called my attorney before I poured my first cup of coffee. "Richard," I said quietly, "I'd like to make some changes to my trust." There was a long pause, then he replied, "I'll have my office ready for you in an hour." I looked once at the family photo sitting beside Susan's old wedding ring. I should have done this years ago. Richard Collins had been my attorney for 23 years. He wasn't just the man who handled my estate planning. He had become a trusted friend, the kind who knew when to ask questions and when silence was the better gift. When I walked into his office the morning after Christmas, he took one look at my face and pushed a fresh cup of coffee across the conference table. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," he nodded. "I figured." He didn't rush me. He didn't ask why I'd called before 8 o'clock on the day after Christmas. Instead, he opened my trust documents and waited. Finally, he said quietly, "Tell me what happened." I slid my phone across the table. He read the credit card statements first. Then he looked at the photographs I'd saved from Emily's Facebook page. There they were, her parents smiling beside the Rolex, holding expensive shopping bags. Posing in front of the television, the captions read, "Best Christmas ever, feeling so blessed, our daughter and son-in-law spoiled us." Richard looked up. "They used your card, they were authorized users and they bought you nothing." He removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I've represented families for over 30 years, Daniel. I've learned that inheritance doesn't usually destroy relationships. What does? Entitlement." That word stayed with me, entitlement. Maybe because I'd spent years pretending it wasn't growing inside my own family. The truth was Christmas hadn't created this problem, it had simply exposed it. Driving home from Richard's office, memories kept surfacing like old photographs floating to the top of a lake. The first one was 20 years earlier. Michael had just graduated from Ohio State. He sat across from me in a diner, looking defeated. "Dad, I've got almost 60,000 in student loans." "I know. I'll be paying these until I'm 40. Susan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. We'd already talked about it. That afternoon I paid every dollar. Michael cried. He hugged both of us. "I'll never forget this." He meant it. At least I believe he did back then. A few years later he called again. "Dad, I found the perfect house. Congratulations." The bank approved the mortgage but was short on the down payment. Susan looked at me. I already knew what she was thinking. "Help him," we wrote another check. "Michael promised, I'll pay you back." I smiled. "No, you won't." He laughed. "I mean it." "I know." He hugged us again. Susan smiled all the way home. Helping our son felt good. It felt like parenting never really ended. Neither of us realized we'd started removing every obstacle life placed in front of him. Then came the failed business. He'd invested with a friend who turned out to be reckless with money. Michael called late one Friday night. "Dad," his voice cracked, "I think I'm going to lose everything." By Monday morning I'd transferred enough money to settle the debts. He kept his house, his marriage stayed intact. His credit remained excellent. Everyone praised how responsible he'd been during a difficult situation. Only two people knew the truth, Susan and me. After Susan died, the requests became more frequent. Never outrageous, just constant. "Dad, daycare is expensive." "Dad, Emily's car needs repairs." "Dad, property taxes surprised us." "Dad, we're trying to refinance." "Dad, can you help with the kids' tuition?" Every request sounded reasonable individually. Together they painted a different picture, one I'd refused to see. I missed Susan terribly. Helping Michael made me feel like she was still part of our lives somehow. Looking back, maybe I wasn't helping him. Maybe I was comforting myself. A week after Susan's funeral, I'd stood alone in our bedroom holding one of her sweaters. I remembered something she'd said years before while we watched Michael struggle through high school. "You know what worries me?" "What?" "You're always ready to rescue him." "That's what fathers do." She smiled sadly. "No, they teach their children how to rescue themselves." At the time, I thought she was being too hard on him. Now I wondered if she'd seen something I refused to acknowledge. Richard interrupted my thoughts by sliding new paperwork toward me. "I've drafted the revisions." I read each page carefully. Michael removed as a primary beneficiary. Emily removed entirely. The grandchildren remain protected, not through their parents. Direct educational trusts, college, trade school, medical emergencies. The money could only be used for them, not by them, and certainly not by their parents. The rest of my estate would be divided among several organizations that had quietly mattered to Susan and me for years. A children's hospital, a scholarship fund for students entering skilled trades, a veterans housing program, our local church food pantry. Richard watched me reading. "You've thought this through." "I have. You understand this decision could permanently damage your relationship with your son." I looked out his office window. Cars rolled slowly through the snowy streets of downtown Columbus. Parents carried shopping bags, children laughed while throwing snowballs, Christmas was ending for everyone else. Mine had ended yesterday morning. I don't want to punish Michael. Richard waited. I want to stop enabling him. He smiled faintly. Those are two very different things. I signed every page one after another. I had barely reached my truck when my phone rang. Emily. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, hello. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Hi, Dad. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, actually, she laughed softly. We've got kind of an emergency. What happened? Well, she hesitated. We found the perfect SUV. I frowned. An emergency SUV, she laughed again. You know what I mean? Not really. The dealership has this year-end sale, but we need $15,000 today for the down payment. I leaned back against the truck. Yesterday she'd watched me leave her house without a single Christmas gift. Today she wanted $15,000. No apology, no acknowledgement, just another request. So, she continued, could you wire it today? For years I would have answered before she finished asking. Instead I looked up at the grey December sky, thought about Susan, thought about Richard's single word, entitlement, then I spoke. No, silence, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally she whispered, what? I said no. You've never said no before. I know. Another long pause. Then her voice changed, the sweetness disappeared. Is this about yesterday? No, it's about the last 20 years. She didn't answer. I was about to end the call when she asked the question that told me everything I needed to know. Her voice was cautious now, almost nervous. You're still leaving everything to Michael someday. She stopped, then quietly finished, right. I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades I didn't feel guilty. I simply ended the call. I didn't hear from Michael for the rest of that afternoon. No texts, no voicemail, no apology, only silence. The strange thing was I didn't spend the day waiting for my phone to ring like I normally would have. Instead, I drove to the cemetery. Susan always loved the quiet after Christmas. She used to say the day after the holiday was when people finally stopped performing and started being themselves again. I brushed a thin layer of snow from her headstone and stood there with my hands buried in my coat pockets. I finally said no, I whispered. The wind drifted through the bare oak trees. For a moment I almost imagined her smiling. Not because our family was falling apart, because I'd finally started telling the truth. The knock on my front door came just after 6 that evening. I already knew who it was. Michael never knocked softly, 3 sharp pounds, a pause, then 2 more. I opened the door. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Emily followed him with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Neither one looked angry anymore, they looked confused. Dad, Michael began. Emily said, you hung up on her. I did. She was just asking for help. I know, he frowned. So what's going on? I looked at both of them for several seconds, then I walked into the living room. If we're going to have this conversation, let's sit down. Nobody spoke while we settled into our chairs. The grandfather clock Susan had bought for our 25th anniversary ticked steadily in the corner. Michael finally broke the silence. If this is about forgetting your Christmas gift, I raised my hand. It's not. Relief flashed across his face. Then I reached into the folder Richard had given me earlier that day. I'd like you to look at something. I slid several sheets of paper across the coffee table. Michael barely glanced at them. What is this? Credit card statements. He looked again, his expression changed. Emily leaned over his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The pages showed every charge. December 23rd, the jewelry store, the department store, the electronics retailer, the designer boutique. Each purchase was highlighted. Each purchase had been made using my account. Michael slowly looked up. You checked the statements? I did. I was going to tell you when. He hesitated. I don't know, before or after the bill arrived. His shoulders dropped. Dad, I trusted you. Emily suddenly jumped in. We were going to pay you back. I looked at her. Were you? Of course. When? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Michael rubbed both hands across his face. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. What wasn't? The card got declined on my business account. So you used mine. Just temporarily. For nearly $9,000. We were going to replace it. I nodded slowly. And while you were replacing it, I leaned forward. You forgot to buy your own father a Christmas present. Nobody answered. The silence was louder than any argument. Finally, Michael sighed. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. That sentence surprised me more than the credit card charges. Not because it was cruel, because he genuinely believed it. I asked quietly, you really don't understand. It was just one Christmas. I shook my head. No, it wasn't, he frowned. Then what was it? It was 40 years. Both of them stared at me. I stood up and walked toward the bookshelf. Framed photographs filled the shelves. Susan holding newborn Michael, Michael's little league team, his college graduation, our family vacation in the Smoky Mountains, his wedding, his children's birthdays. Every picture represented another season of our lives. I picked up one photograph from his graduation. You remember this day, he smiled faintly. Of course. You remember who paid your student loans, his smile disappeared. You did, the house you helped. You loaned me money. It wasn't a loan. He looked away. The daycare bills, he didn't answer. The private school tuition, still nothing. The roof after the hailstorm, Emily quietly lowered her eyes. The medical bills when Lily broke her arm. Michael whispered, I know. No, I said calmly, you remember. Knowing and remembering aren't the same thing. I returned to my chair. You know what hurts the most? He looked at me. I don't care about the money, I care that somewhere along the way, I paused. You stopped seeing it as mine. His face tightened. I never thought that. Really, you've always had plenty. There it was, the sentence I'd been hearing in different forms for years. You've always had plenty. As though having enough somehow erased ownership, I smiled sadly. Exactly. What? You've had access to my help for so long, I pointed toward the statements, that you stopped seeing generosity, you started seeing availability. Emily finally spoke. We didn't think you'd mind, I nodded. I know. She looked surprised, you know. Yes, that's exactly the problem. Conversation went nowhere after that. Michael insisted they hadn't intended to hurt me. Emily repeated that they would have paid every penny back. Neither one understood why trust mattered more than reimbursement. Eventually they left, not angry, not apologetic, just frustrated, as if I had suddenly changed the rules of a game we'd been playing for years. The truth was I had, in the weeks that followed, Michael started changing. He sold his boat and motorcycle. He cancelled the ski trip. He stopped asking for money. Emily returned to teaching full-time. They downsized vacations and cancelled luxury memberships. More importantly, the requests stopped. Then Robert, Emily's father, showed up at my door carrying a black gift bag. Inside was the Rolex. He asked Michael where he bought it and learned the truth. If receiving a gift costs someone their dignity, Robert said, it's not really a gift. He returned the watch. I respected him for that. My grandson Ethan came to visit. Dad's been telling everyone you're getting forgetful, he whispered. I felt the room go still. Michael had been planting seeds of doubt, preparing a story in case I ever pushed back. I got copies of my medical records. Every cognitive assessment was normal. I had documentation ready. A year passed. Ryan and Michael are the same person. I'm changing the names in this final section to protect the story's integrity. Michael finally came to me with a check for $8,743.18, the exact amount charged to my credit card. He had sold his boat and motorcycle. He had started therapy. He was no longer the same man who had shrugged at me on Christmas morning. Owe you more than money, he said. I owe you the truth. I kept telling.